No, our understanding has always been that we say 10:30 and we really mean 10:35. However, today we're starting at 10:40. So, Johnny, John's going to start with some music today. What?
Someone else got a face mask on.
Yeah. No, I think we're okay yet.
Forgive the really simple sound setup. I couldn't even cue it before we started, so
I think we'd be fine with that.
probably. I don't know very many Christian songs, so I'm just gonna play other songs. Patty Griffin. As I roll, going so slow, just down below me is the old sea. Just down below me is the old sea. Nobody knows so many things so out of range. Something so strange, something so sweet, something so lonely. The further I go, more letters from home, they never arrive. And I'm alone all of the way, alone and alive. Just gotta go, where I don't know, no, this is the thing. Somebody said, somebody told me a long time ago. The further I go, more letters from home, they never arrive. And I'm alone all of the way, alone and alive.
That's gorgeous.
I just gotta think of another one. This one's just a love song, but it's David Francie. He was born in Scotland, but he grew up in Cape Breton. It's really nice. Long road, dark night, nothing but headlights. I'll see some bright lights when I get home to you. Framed in your doorway, your arms open wide. I'll fold you in my arms and hold you inside. 'Cause I wanna tell you, come rain or come shine, it'll always be your love, you'll always be mine. Sometimes I wonder, what do you see in me? Is it someone you're wishing or hoping I'll be? Sometimes I wonder, I can't help myself. Will your love go someplace with somebody else? Sometimes you wonder what I see in you. Just picture the sun on an ocean of blue. Picture that ocean so deep, so wide. Feel the sun on the water in the pull of the tide. 'Cause I wanna tell you, come rain or come shine, that I'll always be your love, you'll always be mine.
Thank you. It's beautiful. So I thought I'd share a couple of more prayers from or poem prayers from Padre Gotuma and the Corrymeela community.
It's hard to hear you, Pete, sorry.
Maybe just put the volume up a bit.
Yeah, there's not a lot.
Yeah, you might
Check.
have to, yeah,
Much better.
yeah. You might get a bit.
It's amazing what happens when somebody is brave enough to say, there's a need here.
Yeah.
So these are, I've been loving this little book called Daily Prayer with the Corrymeela community that is written by, these are prayers written by Padre Gotuma that visited us last year. So I shared 2 of them last week, and I'll share 2 this week too. He quotes John chapter 1, verses 38 and 39 and says, "They said to him, 'Rabbi, where are you staying?' He said to them, 'Come and see.'" And then this is what Padre writes. "Jesus of Nazareth, you met unlikely people in unlikely places and joined yourself to them in friendship. May we be like you in this way, finding friends at crossroads and bus stops, in queues and crises, in kindness and curiosity, because we, like you, need the company of others. Amen." And then one more, quoting Luke 5:29. "Then Levi gave a great banquet for him in his house, and there was a large crowd of tax collectors and others sitting at the table with them." And Padre writes, "Jesus of the table, you gathered unexpected people around hearths of hospitality. You stretched out your hand for grapes and bread, for wine and welcome. May we populate our tables with all kinds of people, because at the table our hearts can be glad for a while. Amen." So it's Father's Day. Happy Father's Day. It's also Juneteenth was yesterday, the 19th. Was that Friday? Juneteenth? Saturday?
This is the 20th.
This is the 20th. Tomorrow is National Indigenous Peoples Day. So to me it seems like 3 momentous days in one weekend, but
Today is World Refugee Day.
World Refugee Day, 4.
Mm-hmm.
But one of these things is not like the other. One of these things is not the same. To me, it seems. My Sesame Street understanding. Father's Day seems banal, doesn't it, compared to World Refugee Day, Juneteenth, National Indigenous Peoples Day. All cries for justice. And I thought maybe to lead us in prayer today, I would use Andy Wood's prayer. Andy is a pastor of the Winnipeg Vineyard, Center Vineyard, and he's a dear friend. He's a beautiful person. He has a Métis background too, and he wrote this prayer, and I found that I loved it. Today, on this National Indigenous Peoples Day, which I guess is tomorrow, we give thanks for the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people of our community and country. We acknowledge, and here he acknowledges all of the nations in his area, the Anishinaabe, is that right? Anishinaabe? The Cree, the Oji Cree, the Dakota, the Dene, or Dene, and Métis. And here I would say Peskin-Makati, the peoples, as the original stewards of this land. We acknowledge these peoples as the original stewards of this land. We acknowledge that we're on Treaty 1 territory. This treaty allowed settler people to live here and was signed in your name, God. We acknowledge this because we want to honor you, Jesus. We say today that Indigenous lives matter and that all lives do not matter until all lives matter. Lord, we hold up to you the injustices that have been done and continue to be done against our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We look at the disproportionate representation of access to education, health care, clean water, and opportunity in our province, in our provinces. We see the misrepresentation in the criminal justice system and child and family welfare agencies. We see the missing and murdered girls and women. We see the child taken and the parent left behind. We see the generational trauma. God, would you heal us and heal our society and heal our land? Would you free us from racism in our own hearts and in our institutions that shape us? May we be shaped by you and by the values of your kingdom. Let us deeply hear the voices that for too long have not been heard, and may we find your Spirit's whispers amidst the cries of the wounded, the hurting, the traumatized. Creator, may our worship and prayers rise like smoke to mingle with your heart, and may you breathe on us and fill us with your Spirit. May you walk with us as we navigate these peculiar and perilous times in which you are shaking the heavens and the earth. Guide us as we seek to be reconcilers. Give us eyes to see your hand moving amidst many who claim to be your agents, and ears to hear the whisper of your voice amidst the shouting throngs who claim to speak for you. We ask for discernment, patience, and fortitude to walk in the way you have for us. I think maybe a good way to pray today would just be silence. We'll just hold all of these things together, but in particular too, we want to hold Eric. Pete's son is going to come back to Bangor to Calais this week from Bangor and going into palliative care. So we'll just hold Eric in our hearts too, and everybody else that we love and we know has been struggling with circumstance or disease. So welcome to worship. And I want to read a passage from John chapter 2. And I guess what I'd like to do is begin by just asking you what you hear in it. So I'll read you the chapter and then I just love some thoughts. It's kind of a funky story. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "Son, we have an emergency." I kind of ad-libbed. I wanted to see if anybody was listening. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine. It's not loud enough."
Was an emergency.
Yeah.
And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." So they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." So they took it to him. And when the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and didn't know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew. The head waiter called the bridegroom and he said, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poorer wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. What do you hear in the story?
He listens to a woman.
He listened to a woman. That's I see that too. It's one of my main points today. Sort of. But I guess that it's his mom.
Yeah.
He listened to his mom. He listened to a woman.
I feel amazed that the servants just took the water they thought was water and took it to the head without questioning. At least it's not marked anyway.
That the servants they just went ahead and did this. They were told what to do and they just went ahead and did it. They didn't have any capacity to heal the situation, but when somebody told them what to do, they were willing to do it. Yeah.
I suppose knowing the custom to serve the better wine first, Jesus could have made an inferior wine.
If Jesus was the kind of God that a lot of our theology has said, who's really out to stamp us down, he would have served inferior wine. Boone's Farm. Or water. But instead, he's represents the kind of God that wants delight and abundance to fill the earth. And the best wine comes. Nice. That's good. Because I think we often in our heads have a very inferior view of God as God relates to us. But this is a picture of beauty. What else do you see? Yeah?
There's been a lot of attention lately, I think, to Jesus' emphasis on mercy instead of purity. And so Jesus was filling up the water, it was for purification, right? The old vessels. And so instead of it being for purification, it was for party.
Did you hear? Were you guys able to hear? Okay. Walt said that the jars were for the Jewish purification rite, and he said that these days there's a lot of talk about what does God really want? Is it purification or is it mercy? And he said, but what he seems to really want is a party.
I was aligning that with mercy.
Oh, you're aligning that with mercy. That he takes the water that was for purification, and he bypasses that function and goes instead to the joy of comradeship and communion and social context and being together. What a beautiful little story for the first miracle in John's Gospel. Any other ideas anybody wants to share?
Well, as we were driving into the parking lot, on the radio was Jeremiah was a bullfrog. Now, if you know the song and you know that it's not applicable, but the first words are Jeremiah was a bullfrog, he was a good friend of mine. I never understood a single word he said, but I helped him drink his wine.
Symbolic. That's wonderful. Jeremiah was a bullfrog. This reminds me that during the prayer, because we have this situation outside here and just a simple microphone connected to a speaker instead of through a mixer and all those things, the wind blew through and it got a little bit loud. And I was going to cover it, and then I thought, oh no, that's the voice of the Spirit. I just don't want to stop that. God all around, God in everything, God every moment. Well, several times I've told the story and I can tell it very quickly. I want to start here. I got asked to do a wedding for some folks who were getting married later in life, and it had a difficult. Hello. You've probably heard this part before. Anyway, I got asked to do this wedding for some folks who had were getting married later in life and had come through some difficult times, and I remember asking our whole church to pray, because I said, tonight, or I think it was later on a Sunday night, I'm going to get to speak to a huge mass of people from the town that I never get to speak to. So could you pray that whatever I say is really a gift from God? I want to say something that comes from the heart of God. And I didn't know what to say until just before the wedding. And then suddenly I knew that I wanted to read this chapter, this passage. And when I read it, I said, I just have 3 things to say. Because we're told that Jesus is the representation of God. Jesus is the picture of what God is like. And it seems to me that we can learn things about God if we look at this story. Number 1, we can learn that God likes to come to our parties. It's the first thing. Second thing is, God cares about the things that seem small, not just the big things. He cares about the fact that the wine had run out. And I remember saying, I know that might not be a small thing to all of you. And the third thing is that when God gets involved in something, the result is better than anybody could have imagined. So just those 3 things. And then Mary Ellen was there, and it was a beautiful wedding situation at someone's home. And when I tried to walk down after the service was over to get a beer at the cafe, or not at the tent, and I couldn't get there. I couldn't get to the food, and I couldn't get to the beer, because so many people came up and started talking and saying, "Is God really like that?" That's exactly the opposite of what we've heard our entire life. Is that really the God? Is that really what God is like? And I was just so stunned by this interaction. Second thing I want to say about this story is that I think it really speaks to who Jesus is. Like, I've been trying to put together in these talks, how do we take the humanity of Jesus and the divinity of Jesus that the church has believed in? How do we understand that? And I've given some ideas about that in some ways that are starting to make sense to me. But I think this is very interesting in light of that question. And Brad, who teaches in our program, is the dean of our graduate program in theology, says what this story demonstrates, along with one other one that's in the Synoptic Gospels, is Jesus' incredible humility, because he's actually wrong in the situation, and he's willing to learn. When his mom speaks to him and says it's time, he doesn't believe it is, but he's willing to listen to the voice of the Spirit and to change. He's willing, and that's actually a miracle, isn't it? Because most of the time when we have our mind made up about something, we don't get out, we don't change. But Jesus, in his humility, in his weakness in the situation, is willing to listen to the truth enough to step toward it. And as he does, something changes in the social, historical context of everything. Everything changes at that point. Third thing I want to say is this. I better look at my note. We have a need for things to be changed. Sometimes many of us live with great comfort. We've had some wonderful talks recently with some of the people who've come from different nations to settle in St. Stephen. And one family was telling us about the violence in their town and what it meant for them to allow the children to go to the chocolate park without the parents. They said, this is something we couldn't have done for the last 15 years. We would never have allowed our children out of our sight. And I suddenly thought, man, we're living in heaven, and we don't even know it. We don't understand what it's like to live with less violence than other places. And yet, this is not a perfect heaven either. Obviously, there's a lot of issues. But then I thought, okay, there's some need for extreme change in our overall societies and the way we do things. The last year or two has just brought that to the fore. There's a brilliant TED Talk, best one I've seen in a while, by a Harvard law professor named Larry Lessig. And it says, our democracy does not represent the people. Here's how to fix it. And Larry Lessig, I hope you go and watch the TED Talk, because actually the PowerPoint is brilliant. But has anybody seen this talk? Yeah, oh, you have. Mom, you make me so mad. That's from an old story. Okay, so Larry Lessig says this. He says, the protests in Hong Kong began because of a law. It's actually two things that have been huge. But the first law is because the pro-Beijing government decided to institute the law that China had the right to nominate the people that would run for leadership in Hong Kong. They have about 1,200 people that they said are representative out of a population of 7 million. And Larry Lessig says that means that the people that are doing the nominating for who could actually control the government, that's 0.02%. So 0.02% are really the ones who get to decide, not, you know, they don't get to decide the results of an election, but they get to decide who will run in the election. And they will only allow people that toe the party line. So that's how it all begins. And what Larry Lessig says is, they actually learned this from an American. His name was Boss Tweed. And Boss Tweed said in New York years ago, I don't care who wins an election as long as I get to nominate all the parties. So Larry Lessig says this is Tweedism. Whenever you have a two-step election where one group gets to choose who gets to run, then you have actually established an evil situation. And he says, you know, in 1923 in Texas, for instance, this was absolutely overt because white people were the only ones allowed to vote in the primaries. Black people were allowed to vote in the general election if they could get past all of the restrictions, but they weren't allowed to vote in the primaries. And so what Larry Lessig says is, whenever you have this situation, you have a democracy that is responsive only to the people who controlled the nominating. Does that make sense? Okay, so then he said, do you know how many people pay for candidates in America? He said 400 families in the last election gave as much as 1/2 of the rest of the country. And he said there's actually a primary before you have your primaries, and the primary is the money primary. Who gets to put forward, which candidates can go forward? The ones that have enough money. Which ones get enough money? The ones that are, it's the money primary. It's these people that have enough can get the sponsors, the corporate sponsors, the individual sponsors. And he said, how much money do you have to give to be relevant? He said, I think it's about $5,780. That's the exact amount. That's the maximum you can give to one candidate, one person can give to one candidate. He said, you know what? In a population of America, it turns out that there's about 58,000 people that gave that much money in the election. It comes to 0.02%. In other words, the nominators who nominated America with their money are about the same percent as the situation in Hong Kong. And he says this is absolutely not a democracy. It's an oligarchy or a banana republic. So isn't that a fascinating kind of thing? That's just a demonstration behind the scenes of the need for change. And then what actually changes? What is it? What's the process of change like? Like what's going on in Mary in this story? That's what I'm really thinking about. What's Mary doing? I remembered this morning to read again about Emmet Till, because I was thinking about Juneteenth. Do you know what Juneteenth is? Does everybody know? Yeah, you got it?
I don't.
Okay. Juneteenth, on June 19th, 1865, so June 19th, 1865, about 2 months after the Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered in Virginia, Gordon Granger, a Union general, arrived in Galveston, Texas to inform enslaved African Americans of their freedom, and that the Civil War had ended. General Granger's announcement put into effect the Emancipation Proclamation, which had been issued more than 2.5 years earlier, on January the 1st, 1863, by President Abraham Lincoln. So the people were actually free in Galveston, Texas. They just didn't know it yet. And this general arrived, and he told them on June 19th, "You are free." And so there was such a day of celebration that for years and years, this has been an important holiday for African Americans. And finally, this week, President Biden has instituted that it will be a national holiday. So, yeah.
This holiday happens on Saturday, right?
I think it's on the, well,
Whenever June 19th.
I think it's whenever June 19th is.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was, some obstacle to get passed in the Congress because people didn't want it because it's going to cost $600 million. But to pay civil servants for that day. But I think, wow, to vote against a holiday, to vote against a holiday that means so much, what is it really saying about you? So, okay. Here's a situation. Martin Luther King had been a pastor for about 1 year when Emmet Till from Chicago, a little boy from Chicago, went to see family in Mississippi, and he bought something in a store, and as he left the store, this 14-year-old boy, he just said something that seemed natural to him. He said to the lady behind the counter, "Bye, baby," and whistled. He came from Chicago. This was his way of speaking. 2 days later, he was taken by men at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he was beaten and tortured to a pulp so that his face wasn't recognizable. And then he was placed in a river. The men were apprehended. An all-white jury let them off completely in less than 1 hour.
But the Republicans.
I don't know. I don't know if they were Republicans. In those days, they were probably Democrats. But they were people who were evil, and they were captured by a spirit of evil. And it was a situation that needed some changing, right? Everything needed to change. So you know what happened next? This boy's mom, her name was Emmet Till Bradley. She thought this was a terrible cross to bear. But she had a very strange experience. A voice spoke to her. She says that she didn't feel alone in her agony because a voice spoke to her, and the voice said, "Mamie, it was ordained from the beginning of time that Emmet Lewis Till would die a violent death. You should be grateful to be the mother of a boy who died blameless like Christ. Bo Till will never be forgotten. There is a job for you to do now." Because of this voice and this experience, this intuitive experience, who knows whether she accurately heard God or not, but this is what she heard inside of her. She insisted that there be an open casket when her boy's body was brought back to Chicago. And for 3 days, people filed back. They say 600,000 people saw Emmet Till's body. And then 3 months later, Rosa Parks said, "I will not go to the back of the bus." And after that, there was the Alabama bus boycott. And after that, there were the Freedom Riders. One woman speaking, the actions that follow. We need change now. And I guess we need a Mary to speak to the Jesus that's in the church and society. And we need better wine. National Indigenous Peoples Day, Juneteenth, World Refugee Day. These are cries for a better wine.